Mary Beth Gordon for Ask an Expert on the Equine Microbiome. Sorry, fumbled that a bit. I was like, that felt wrong. It is microbiome. And it's a topic that Jessa was meant to cover tonight. And I was like, I am so into learning about the microbiome right now in relation to myself that I was like, I need to do this. And so I actually took this topic away from her. And I am so excited to learn from you this evening, Mary Beth. And we really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks so much, Mackenzie. It's great to be here. Yeah, I will say definitely one of our challenges is teaching people what is this word, microbiome? What is this? Sounds scientific. What does it really mean? So excited to talk to you about this tonight.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe I've just been living under a rock, but it's a term that I have only become familiar with in the last like maybe 12 months. Maybe that is even an exaggeration, but it's so cool that we have this opportunity to learn from you when you've devoted your career to becoming an expert on this topic. So, before we jump into the questions that we received from members, do you mind just giving us a bit about your background? Kind of where are you based today? How did you get to the role that you're in today? Kind of what led you to where we are this evening?
Yeah, absolutely happy to share that because I've had a bit of a fun career trajectory, and I think it's good for horse people to learn about it because I know I grew up in the Northeast, grew up in New Jersey on the Jersey Shore, and rode hunter jumper, a little bit of equitation, a little bit of venting, a little bit of dressage. But everybody was like, "Oh, you're a horse girl, and you're good in the sciences, so you're going to be a veterinarian." And I thought about going to grad school, and
We seem to have lost Mary Beth. I'm guessing she'll come right back, but we were just in the middle of hearing about her bio. We'll give her a second here to come back. Are you with us, Mary Beth? We can't hear you. Oh, there you are.
oh,
Can,
it's just a delay. Hmm.
here we could go
Yeah.
if you go video off,
Okay. Yeah, we'll try that.
might help.
Camera off.
How about now? Are
All right.
you
Do you feel like you can hear me better now? Is that
I can
better?
hear you.
So
Yeah,
is the
this is no
camera.
problem.
Okay. All right. We'll just do that.
Perfect. Start us. We lost you. Kind of right around Jersey Shore.
Yeah. So, yeah, before MTV made the Jersey Shore a really weird place, it was actually a great spot to grow up and have horses and take riding lessons and show horses. And at the time, yeah, everyone just thought, oh, if you like animals and you're good in the sciences, you go to veterinary school. And my undergrad, I did at Delaware Valley University in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, and I was a large animal science pre-vet major. Rode on the equestrian team. Always had horses to ride while I was in college. But then, when it was time for me to graduate and go to vet school, it did not feel like the right fit at the time. And I thought about going to graduate school and doing some, more work in nutrition. And I talked to my advisor about it because I really love my equine nutrition classes. And he was like, oh, there's no jobs. You can't do it with actually horse nutrition. You have to become a swine nutritionist or something like that. He's like, don't do it. Go to vet school. So then I went and I rode and trained horses for a couple of years because it's like every horse girl thinks, well, maybe I can make it. Maybe I can do that. And I ended up eventually up in the Hudson Valley of New York, where there's a lot of really wonderful, show barns, and Old Salem Farm is right down the road, and so rode and trained horses for a couple years up there, and then realized, oh, it's not quite the right fit yet, you know, people know working full time in the horse business as a trainer and riding is really, really, really tough. And I went back to graduate school, got my master's degree, and I actually taught a lot of science. So I taught science and high school science and math for a couple years. And the schedule was great because the minute I was done at the end of the day, I was at the barn and I was on a horse. And then in the summers, I could ride and show. But it still wasn't quite the right fit. So I spent my whole 20s figuring out my career. And then I just sat myself down and I knew I was like, all right, I either need to go to vet school and do that. Or because I was already a teacher and I really like to teach, and my parents are teachers, my sister's a teacher, I said, I think I'm going to go the college professor route. And I'm like, I've always, always, always loved nutrition, human nutrition, horse nutrition, all the things. And so let me look into that as well. And at the time, I had the opportunity, I could either go to vet school or I could go to grad school and study nutrition and exercise physiology. And that's what I did. I ended up going to grad school. I went to Rutgers University for my PhD, and I studied all the neuroendocrinology of appetite in horses, in standardbred racehorses, and then how the different metabolic factors come together and why racehorses don't like to eat sometimes and that type of thing. And then when I graduated, I thought, okay, now I'm going to go be a professor. But one of my committee members on my PhD was consulting for Purina at the time, helping them to develop our Ultium feed. And he said, I think Purina is looking for a nutritionist in the Northeast to run their new veterinary diet program. Like you should go see if they're going to do an interview, what they're going to do. And he made the connection for me, and I got an interview. And I spent one day with Purina in St. Louis at the research farm, and I was blown away. I said to myself, I have to be part of this place. It's incredible. And the commitment the company has made, to research for over 100 years now, has just been something that I really, really wanted to be a part of. And I always told myself that I was going to stay in working for a corporate feed company for 10 years. I was going to go in there and I was going to learn every single thing I could about doing research in horses, formulating feeds, selling feeds to customers, helping horses out all over the country. And now I'm in my 21st year. So I've been over double that amount of time, but I've had still having a great career with the company. And it's been their commitment to research and all the research we've been able to do, which has developed our whole microbiome quotient and microbiome database that always keeps it, the best place for me to be.
That's amazing. I mean, I love the kind of roundabout way that you got there and landed in a spot. I mean, 21 years. It seems like you've found the perfect spot. So that is truly incredible and not something you hear very often. So really, really love to hear that background. Um, okay, Mary Beth, can you tell us a bit about like just the definition of the microbiome? Like for riders or listeners in general who are just not familiar with this term, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, for sure. So the microbiome is basically all the little organisms. We tend to think of the gut microbiome as one of the major things we talk about, but all the little organisms that live together in the gut that are bacteria, protozoa, some are fungi, but mostly aerobic and anaerobic bacteria that are all working together to have a couple different functions in the body. They help break down feedstuffs or food. They help interact with the immune system. And you have actually, and animals do, they have a different microbiome. They're very, very, very tiny little organisms. That's why the word micro, and then biome, they're the little living organisms. There's microbiomes everywhere, all over our bodies, all over the horses' bodies, all over different things. I always like to say and give the example of your right hand has its own microbiome and your left hand has its own microbiome. And they're different depending on if you are right-handed or left-handed. So there's always this interaction of organisms going on all the time in different areas of the body that are conferring health back to either the person or the horse. But the biggest one that we talk about is all the bugs that are inside the horse's gastrointestinal tract that are supporting the immune system, like I said, helping to break down feeds, signaling to the body through what proteins that we call cytokines that tell us if the horse is inflamed or not inflamed. And then we can influence it. The microbiome is the number one influencer on horses' gut health. So for example, when the barometric pressure in the environment drops very quickly, we all know like a big storm is coming through, that actually affects the bugs in the microbiome. So when you think about sensitive horses and the barometric pressure, changes all of a sudden, so that can increase the risks for colic or gastrointestinal discomfort. The microbiome is related to that. We know that when horses colic, the biggest amounts of different bacteria in the gut flip. So they actually flip spaces instead of 1 and 2. The number 2 slides into number 1. We don't know if that's a before or an after effect, but you can study these things and basically get a window into the horse's health and then influence the microbiome by what you feed the animal in order to make them more healthy.
And is the microbiome something like, is the horse born with a certain microbiome and then you can influence it using different kind of nutrition over their life? Or is their microbiome constantly changing depending on their environment and different factors?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does change very rapidly. For example, when they're born, they're actually starting to inoculate their microbiome when they come through the vaginal birth canal. So when they're going through the birth canal, all those fluids and blood and tissue and all those little bugs are in that area are starting to inoculate that foal. And then as the foal enters the world and literally touches the ground and licks the wall and eats the dirt and suckles its mom's teats, and does all of these different things. That is that foal getting exposed to the environment and exposed to the different tissues on the broodmare that is going to inoculate and get that microbiome started. And then it's going to be influenced by how that baby is managed, what that baby eats, where that baby is in the country, and also the breed of that baby, the sex of that baby. So, yeah, there's all different factors that all play into influencing the microbiome, and every horse's microbiome truly is individual to them. It's very much like a fingerprint because of all those different factors that go into that bug culture all over the body.
Is there, I mean, I don't, is there like a test to determine if your horses, is there even a healthy microbiome versus an unhealthy microbiome? Or what is the best case scenario for how you support your horse's microbiome?
Yeah, so great question. It's a question we asked ourselves over a decade ago, because work in the human space and in other species of animals besides horses was starting to come together in terms of the microbiome. And I sat down with scientists at Purina and we said, all right, what are two of the biggest problems, we typically see? And it comes back to colic, comes back to laminitis, both that have, very significant interactions with the gut, right? And gut effects. And we said, okay, we really need to try to understand better what's going on in the microbiome and with all these bugs. But we said, nobody's truly mapped it yet for horses. So yeah, we could take some random samples here and there, but we don't have anything to compare to. How do we get enough samples to be able to say, this is a healthy microbiome and this is an unhealthy microbiome? So what we did over a decade ago is we sent the call out to horse owners across the country, and boy, did horse owners show up in spades. Like, they did fantastic. We sent kits out and said, all right, veterinarians, horse owners, we need you to do fecal swabs on your horses and you need to send them to our lab. And we got over 5,000 samples, and every single person had to fill out a significant survey about their horse, their age, their breed, their feeding program, any of their health conditions, their body condition score, their body weight. And we just started building this database, and all of those samples that came to us, we extracted all the DNA from the fecal samples, and then we run it through what's called a sequencer, and we get an idea of what all of those bugs are. Well, we get an idea of somewhere around 40 to 60% of the bugs, to tell you the truth, because we actually have a lot of bugs that are still unknown. But we have very sophisticated scientific technology and a full-time bioinformatics statistician who he is just incredible in terms of his work, has a PhD in this type of microbiome research, and helps us to put all of this data together. And we have mapped the core healthy microbiome for horses. So we statistically have enough samples. All the sampling is great quality and robust enough, and all the reads of all the DNA is strong enough. So we do have a kit that people can purchase, and that kit allows you to take a fecal swab of your horse, send it into us, we extract the DNA, we run it through our sequencer, and we can tell you how close your horse is to a typical healthy microbiome. Now, like I said earlier, horses each have an individual microbiome, and it can be very sometimes breed dependent or management dependent on what's going on with that horse. So we tend to have a lot of quarter horses, thoroughbreds, warm bloods in our database. When people have, for example, Mustangs and send in the Mustang samples, those have been very clear to be quite different than our other horses. And that was very, very interesting to me, because looking at those Mustangs, something was going on with their genetic makeup and their management. And, we didn't have 5,000 Mustang samples to compare against. But the Mustangs actually appeared to be very healthy for them, even though it was divergent from what sort of was typically in our range. And we continue to build the database today. So people send in all kinds of samples for us through the kits, and it's been really, really exciting, because we're starting to get enough samples with horses with specific medical conditions, either history of colic or insulin resistance or fecal water syndrome. And then when we have enough of those samples, we can specifically look at those horses' microbiomes, and we're able to see, oh, these horses' microbiomes, they look this certain way. And then we can develop nutritional interventions to help change that microbiome or support that microbiome in a different way to help with that medical condition.
Got it. And are there indicators for a rider that their horse's microbiome is out of balance?
Yeah, so horses every day sometimes like to think of things to make them feel a little bit out of balance, right? You're like, what is it today? And horses that are showing any type of gastrointestinal um, symptom, whether it is, lack of appetite, picky eating, their manure is not formed well into healthy, manure balls and piles, excessive gas and bloating, discomfort, really sensitive to having their girth, taken up, or whether when you go to put your leg on, they can be really bulky to the leg and not want to go forward, type of thing. And so the first thing is recognizing, does my horse appear to have a symptom that is related to their gut going on? And then you've got to figure out, okay, where is the problem coming from? So, a lot of horses that are either racing or showing and getting on and off trailers and all that kind of stuff, they have a very highly increased risk of gastric ulcers. So that's usually the first place you need to look, is have your horses scoped, make sure you have a program in place to help decrease the risk of gastric ulceration. If your horse has ulcers, they need to be treated, medically and appropriately until they're resolved. Whether they have squamous ulcers or glandular ulcers also is a difference in terms of how you treat them and how you manage the horse going forward. But if the horse's stomach is clean and it appears to be more like what people call hindgut ulcers, it's like they don't really have a true diagnosis. They don't really have a true one clear thing that is, okay, this is what's causing my horse's discomfort, that's when it's good to do a test and check the microbiome. Um, because based on the database that we have, we can say, yep, your horse is pretty far outside the normal range, and that could be related to their symptomology. Or no, actually, your horse is looking great, and you need to go look somewhere else, because that is the way it can be a little bit with horses. They can be a puzzle, and they can show a certain symptom, but you're not quite sure where it's coming from.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Are there cases where you're seeing the microbiome is impacting like also their rideability or their behavior under the saddle? Like, is that ever correlated?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of like anything. Like if you yourself had sort of, chronic lower GI cramps, you wouldn't necessarily feel good. And also, horses that have an imbalanced microbiome, they're going to tend to have more inflammation in the body, and they're not going to recover as well after exercise. And one of the things that we did while gathering all these data is we developed a specialized probiotic, and we actually were able to trace all of the pathways, and we know how that probiotic actually acts in the microbiome to reduce inflammation in the horse's body. So if their microbiome's out of control, their inflammation's going to be higher, and sort of everything else is a little bit harder in their life. They're not going to recover as well. They're not going to feel as well. It's just like a person. If you don't feel well and then you got to go to the gym, it's not fun.
Yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, like, I just listened to a podcast on the human microbiome and kind of
Mhm.
the the takeaway there was just that most people probably would benefit from being on some sort of probiotic and kind of aiding their microbiome in that way. Is it true that most of like, what portion of the fecal samples that you're receiving are out of balance? Like, are most of our horses out of balance in their microbiome?
Um, Not necessarily, no. I mean, overall, horse people are pretty darn diligent, especially the people that are going to listen to this podcast on the microbiome and they're out there trying to do the very, your target customer for your podcast, right? Like they're really diligent horse owners, and their horses are getting, really good quality hay and good balanced feeds, and they're probably getting some supplements, maybe a few two supplements here or there. Um, but overall, a lot of horses are adaptable and can do just fine. And we have a lot of healthy horses that come through. I'd say we almost at least a third or more are what we call in the green status, which is a typical healthy microbiome. And then we have a yellow status where it shows, oh, you're getting a little further outside normal. And then we have a red status. And those horses are really struggling. And they typically are the ones that have, some fecal water syndrome and some other chronic diarrhea and colitis and that type of thing, because the whole thing is just out of whack. So we see a range, but horses can be resilient if we, keep supporting them the best way we can.
Absolutely. And is there any does the microbiome impact their immune function at all?
Yeah, hugely impacts their immune function. The healthier that microbiome is going to be, every single organ system is affected. So their immune system, their skin, their musculature, like every single thing. Like if you don't have that healthy microbiome and you don't fix that gut, because the microbiome in many ways is that first layer of interaction between what was outside the animal, right? Like grass and hay and grain is outside the animal, and now it's going inside the animal, and it's going to interact with all those bugs of the microbiome, and then it's going to get absorbed or it's going to keep passing on through. And so again, that microbiome is that first line of the relationship between what is outside going inside, and that then affects every single organ stream, downstream from there.
Seems pretty important. Seems like something that we should be talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned high quality forage and supplements. What are the things that are have the biggest impact on a horse's microbiome that we have control over?
Yeah, definitely it's going to be the forage portion of their diet. Horses are hindgut fermenters. They need a certain amount of fiber every day for that gastrointestinal tract to be healthy. Horses have this huge cecum in their body that's full of all these microbes that are breaking down, all the different feedstuffs and producing what we call volatile fatty acids, which are then absorbed by the body and used for their different nutrients. And so the best quality forage that matches your horse's physiology is going to be the very best thing for their microbiome. And it's important that I say that matches your horse's physiology because thoroughbred horses, for example, might do great on a beautiful, 10-acre grass pasture. you know, uh, a metabolic warm blood, big, like fancy German warm blood that wants to have the genetics of an insulin resistant horse, you wouldn't turn them out on that pasture because they would gain too much weight and their insulin would go up and they would, be at increased risk for laminitis depending on their genetic potential. So, definitely you need a forage-based diet first, but you have to match it appropriately to what your horse is doing and what their physiology is.
Yeah, absolutely. What about stress factors? How does that impact the microbiome?
Yeah, so um, it's funny because we've done some research now. We know that and anyone that owns horses and has put a horse on a trailer can see this, right? It's like the minute you put the horse on the trailer, they feel stressed, their cortisol increases, their hormones change very rapidly. Suddenly the manure is shooting out the hind end, and it's coming at a more rapid rate and it may be much more watery than usual. So things can quickly physiologically affect the animal, which, for example, increased, fecal response. But, taking that horse down the road in the trailer absolutely can change their microbiome. Exercise in and of itself can change the microbiome. Um, drugs, any type of drugs that you give the horses, NSAIDs, phenylbutazone, banamine, all those things will affect the microbiome. Antibiotics, of course, the minute you give antibiotics, that's also going to affect the microbiome. So we've been doing research that looks at different supplements that we can give horses after they have antibiotic treatment to help get the microbiome back to a healthy, more normal status. Takes about 2 weeks after those horses have been on the antibiotics. But like I said before, the microbiome is resilient and can come back if you give it the right support. We just have to be careful because everything has a tipping point. You get to, you know, your horse feels stressed in their training program, and then it's on a trailer and traveling a lot, and then it gets a little infection and ends up on antibiotics. And if you stack all these things one after the next, after the next, after the next, then it might be harder to get the microbiome back to where you want it. So you need to be careful how much stress you layer on your horse over time.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. Okay, so we've talked, you mentioned supplements a couple of times. Can we talk a bit about all the different gut supplements that are on the market? And are you able to explain to us the difference between prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna get on my supplement soapbox for a second here. So yeah, horse owners, we love to feed supplements. I feed a bunch of supplements to some of my horses. Other horses don't get as many supplements depending on what they're doing in their life. But I'm pretty adamant that if you're going to feed a supplement, make sure it's truly the right thing to do for the horse. And we established this acronym called the test ride, and we use RIDE, the ride part, stands for research, ingredients, delivered amount, and efficacy. So the biggest thing I see in the horse world with supplements is that many of them do not pass what I call the test ride. Nobody did any research in that supplement, on that supplement in horses. The ingredients might be 50 ingredients long for a tiny little scoop of something. How did you fit 50 ingredients in there? And by the way, like, really, like, it's incredible some of the things you see in some of these supplements. You're like, I don't even know what that is. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Like, what is happening here? And then you have to remember you're feeding a, I don't know, 1,000, 1,200 pound, 1,400 pound horse. So whatever is in that little scoop needs to be in the right amount, the right dose, the right delivered amount for that size animal. And that is a huge problem in the industry. We call it tag dressing, where people put tiny, tiny little amounts of vitamin E or calcium or biotin or whatever in a supplement or in a feed. And so they can call it out on the tag and they can even give it a little guaranteed analysis, but it's nowhere near what a full size horse would need for that nutrient. So, um, so you got to watch out for that. We do not do that at Purina. It's sort of against our integrity policy. Like, anything we put in there is going to be in there at the right amount based on the proper feeding rate of the feed or the supplement. And then E for test ride stands for efficacy. You should see a difference. So for example, you pick out a supplement for weight gain for your horses and you're feeding this little fat supplement and you're going along and it's been 30 days and your horse has not gained any weight. You need to stop and think and reevaluate, like, okay, what else do I need to do and why didn't this work and is there something else that'll work better? So evaluating supplements is one of my favorite things to do in the world because it's been pretty easy for me to be like, nope, fails the test ride, nope, fails the test ride. And with all those gastric health supplements on the market, the majority of them fail the test ride for me. Um, and quite honestly, the probiotic that we launched a few years ago now, the MQ Systemic, uh, I never thought that we would potentially have a probiotic for horses that met the standards we were looking for in my entire career because I've been thinking about it and Purina gets, will get beat up about it. Purina, why is there no probiotics in your feed? These other three feed companies all have probiotics on the label. What are you doing? And it wasn't that we didn't know what was going on or we were like, we don't want to give our customers and their horses probiotics. I said, well, bring me a probiotic that I can put in a feed in a warehouse through a pellet mill that's going to sit at the feed store for 2 weeks and then sit in your barn. And then your horse can chew it and swallow it and can go through the low pH of the horse's stomach and then has to take a ride 70 feet down the small intestine to get to the cecum where it's going to have the largest effect, where the largest amount of the horse's microbiome is in their gut. And then actually has to do something when it gets there. So I struggled. We looked at all kinds of things over the years. Let's look at this probiotic. Let's look at that. Everybody says this one. Oh, this one just showed up. Oh, look at it. And stuff would fail. We had all kinds of little pilot tests. We have this amazing emerging technology lab and all these brilliant scientists in there, and they plate the different probiotics and look at what happens to them in different pHs and when you put, gastric juice in with it all. And I mean, the probiotics were just dying. So it took us a long time, like I said, to find one that truly worked. And so far we've found one. so um, so that's where we're at. Small but mighty. And then to go back to your question about prebiotics versus probiotics versus a postbiotic, prebiotics is basically the food for the bugs. So a prebiotic is something, could be anything, like a feed stuff, like beet pulp is a good prebiotic, soybean hulls, good prebiotic. It's a fiber food that's for the bugs to utilize. There also can be dried yeasts can be considered a prebiotic because those yeasts are basically used in the microbiome to condition the microbiome. But the prebiotics generally are dead. Like if it's going to be a dead yeast, or it's going to be a ingredient like beet pulp or some type of fiber that is going to feed the bugs. Now the probiotics are the live bugs. So those are the ones like I'm talking about. Needs to be alive when you put it in the feed, when you put it, when the horse eats it, in order to be able to do its thing. A lot of us think about probiotics. We think of yogurt, right? You go to the store and you get your yogurt, and it's in the refrigerated section because you got to keep those bugs alive and that type of thing. So that's what probiotics are, and they help do different things in the microbiome depending on what's happening. Um, they might they might be part of the bugs that are there, and they might set up shop for a little while, or they might just be interacting with the bugs and they're actually going to go back out the hind end, but they modulate. That's what most of them do. They're modulating the microbiome and that whole community while they're there. And then some of them, um, you know, you've got to be careful because there's studies out there that show you give certain probiotics to foals and you increase foal diarrhea. You can absolutely upset what's going on in the microbiome and in the hindgut as well if you feed the wrong probiotic and at the wrong amount. So not all probiotics are, just, oh, might help, won't hurt. Some of them actually can be the wrong thing that gut needs. And then the postbiotic, basically, it's a relatively new term that's come out in the last couple years, where it's not a living organism in the hindgut, but it's having its effects in the hindgut after it's usually had some sort of processing. And it may be, like, for example, there's a product out there that is considered a postbiotic. It's a yeast, but then the yeast is grown in all of its little fermentation, uh, like vat, and then they dry the whole thing down together, and now the yeast is dead. The yeast is dead, the fermentase is all in there with it, and then you feed that to the animal and it still has an effect in that hindgut, but it's after all you've done all these different things to it. It's sort of a secondary effect, which is why they call it a postbiotic. Yeah.
Really helpful. And how do you determine which of these or which brand of these or kind of what to give your horse? Is there a way to do that correctly without doing a fecal test, or kind of what is the recommendation there?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. For us, it's like I want horse owners to use that test ride process sort of themselves in their own head when they go shopping. You should use it for any feed, you should use it for any supplement. You know, look at the companies that you're buying stuff from. Are they doing research in horses? Can you find a little research review or any information about that product? It should be on their website. It should not be hidden. It shouldn't be that hard to find, because there's multiple reputable companies that are doing research in their horses. And then again, look at those ingredients and make sure that they make sense to you. You can look at the amounts, make sure that makes sense. And then sometimes it is a little bit of trial and error. So, okay, I'm going to try this for 30 days and I'm going to see if I can see a difference in my horse, or not. But I would caution people from, I saw this on the shelf at the feed store on Saturday. It said probiotic, so I'm just gonna buy it and feed it. Well, that really truly is a little bit of Russian roulette. Like, you need to do some homework before you go to the store, so because there's just way, way, way too much smoke and mirrors out there. It's like everybody thinks they can become a supplement company overnight. There's always a new one. There's always some new supplement. There's always some new fancy thing that's scroll on everybody's, Facebook feed, buy this, buy that, buy this. But again, you sort of have to do your homework a little bit, make sure it seems to be an upstanding situation.
Absolutely. That's a good segue over to Holly's question, which she's asking how effective are feed through pre or probiotics in powder or pellet form compared to human probiotics that require refrigeration.
Yeah, so that's an excellent example and a great question because Prebiotics, because they're already dead, that's not a problem in terms of refrigeration. They're the fiber and the food, for the bugs. Um, but when it comes to those probiotics, yeah, most of them out there aren't going to make it because they're already dead before you even, put them in the feed or put them in the horse's feed bucket. So that's why exactly why I say there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there, because you can go out there and buy all kinds of powder probiotics for horses right now. And like I said, I didn't think we would come up with one in my entire career. And then it took us almost a decade to get it done, to actually prove that this thing would work. And it's a freaking hardy little bug. It's a soil-based organism that lives in the environment. So that's how it's very, very hardy to begin with. So it can survive the gastric juice, it can survive the pelleting, it can get all the way through the gut where it needs to do its job. And there's just a lot out there that cannot do that.
Yeah, totally. And so Lee is wondering kind of what riders should look for when choosing a pre or probiotic. Are there specific ingredients or different like research indicators that you generally look for?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we've only been able to find the one so far. We have a couple others that we're working on in the horizon that we're interested in. Uh, Interestingly, we're actually saying, well, those might work, but I actually think they're not. They might work in the horse, but they may need to be refrigerated. And how does that work? And do you launch a product that somebody would have to have a refrigerator in their barn, which we know is sometimes, but not all, and how do you sell it? The pet food industry has figured out how to put little refrigerators in the pet food aisle for their different diets and stuff like that. But are feed stores ready for that? And how do you handle that if you order from Chewy or Smart Pack or all of those things? Um, so quite honestly, it just goes back to doing the research and find something that I feel really confident in that company, that they've done their work, that they've done the work in the horses, and that's going to give you a better chance for the proper return on your investment, for that supplement that you choose.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can opine on specific products, but we got a question related to Equibrew, which this user is seeing being promoted, and they're just wondering if products like that are worth it, or is it just like really good marketing that is convincing them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, yeah, I'm not here to trash anybody's supplement or stuff like that, but I want to empower you guys to determine, does that seem to be passing the test ride? Does the company that make that product do any research in horses to show that it's passed any of those things that I said? That that it is shelf stable, that it gets through the low pH of the gut, that it actually has horses, besides some five-star website. Um, do they have anything to show that that is appropriate for the horse and going to do what they're say it's going to do? If not, it is a risk for you to buy that product. So I just want to empower you guys to to take a look at those things. And horse people are smart. Horse ladies and horsemen, like, they're freaking smart. So don't let these supplement companies bullshit you. Excuse my French.
Love it. No, I think that's perfect advice, and really actionable. It's use the test ride methodology, run it through those checks, and I think that it'll be pretty clear by the end if it's right for you and your horse or not. Um, Lee is also wondering about thinking about the microbiome support after things like deworming, ulcer treatment, EPM treatment, travel, or stress. Is that something that you emphasize, really focusing on the microbiome and pre or postbiotics at that time, or is this something that you think should be kind of an everyday part of the routine?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And your second part of that is like, should it be, part of the everyday routine? The more you can have that routine for your horse, the more you're going to offset any of those other stressors that happen. Yes, there's going to be a rebalancing period after trailering, after going to a show, after a medication, all of those things. But the best way to do it is to keep the horse as much as possible on the diet and then return them to the way they're being managed and sort of their gut likes to be managed after the stressor. Um, we've done we've done a lot of research with gastric ulcers in horses, and we have a protocol at Purina that we use where we, take horses that are living outside and eating a lot of green grass and with their friends and having a grand old time, and we bring them in and put them in individual stalls. And we put them on a complete feed diet. So they get 100% of their forage and vitamin minerals met and protein, but it's all with a pelleted and beet pulp based diet. So we take away their long stem forage and then we exercise them 3 to 5 days a week, walk, trot, maybe a little canter in an equicizer. And within a few weeks, those horses all get gastric ulcers. And we use it to look at different supplements and to look at different feeding regimens to see, well, okay, well, if I also then feed this supplement, if I feed Outlast, can I reduce the risk of gastric ulceration in horses under these conditions and that type of thing? And how do I reduce inflammation in these horses and help them recover from exercise? And well, we always write into those protocols that when we scope the horses at the beginning and we scope the horses at the end, anybody that would need GastroGuard will give medication to help reverse the gastric ulcers. And um, what we find is we don't need to give them GastroGuard because at the end of the study, if I just put them back out with their friends, let them eat grass, their ulcers go away on their own. So the stomach will basically self-treat itself and heal itself and return to normal, uh, which is really cool. So we always have to think, horses are really sensitive physiologically, right? They were never meant to really, go in trailers and go to horse shows and they didn't necessarily have an easy life in the wild, but it was a different life. And we've bred different types of horses to do different things. And some of them are just very, very sensitive in all ways. So we need to constantly be thinking about what level of stress are we putting on them and what is the cumulative levels of stress, because there does there is a tipping point at some point that we have to be cognizant of.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, totally. I love that advice. Okay, so Pam is asking about for a horse with free fecal water on a forage-based low NSC diet, are there microbiome related strategies or approaches that could help?
Yeah, for sure. Um, We've studied fecal water syndrome in horses. We work with a lot of horses that a lot of the samples that come to us through the microbiome program we have are for horses with fecal water syndrome. I have a mare who's very prone to fecal water syndrome, of course. She belongs to me. Um, I'll tell you the biggest thing that helps these horses with fecal water syndrome is you need to reduce the physical load on the colon. So everybody thinks, okay, forage first for these horses. I'm going to give them, best quality hay I can give them, and I'm going to give them a lot of hay. And these horses have fecal water syndrome. They tend to have an inflammation in their gut. It's sort of very sensitive to scratch factor. And what we found is if you take sometimes all of their forage, or you start with a portion of their forage, and we actually reduce the mechanical load. So you go from feeding hay to hay cubes, or from hay cubes to, a mixture of beet pulp and some hay pellets. Sort of the smaller you can get that fiber length that you're putting into these horses with fecal water syndrome, it helps to rest and heal the gut. And then they can reabsorb the water more healthfully as they're producing their manure. Um, and then certain supplements, like we've certainly found our MQ systemic supplement helps horses with fecal water syndrome. And then you'll find though that these horses sort of have a tolerance level for how much long stem hay they can eat. Like I know my mare, she can tolerate about 10 pounds a day of long stem hay. After that, the scratch factor is just a little too much for her and she starts to get loose. And if she has an insult, she's very sensitive when she gets her vaccines and that type of thing. It'll flare up her fecal water syndrome, and I have to give her some, put her on alfalfa cubes or hay pellets more for a few days and help everything firm up again, and then, sort of wean her back onto more of her long stem hay. So grass can be good for those horses too, if fresh green grass, if they can tolerate the sugar content of the grass and the large quantities that horses like to eat in a very rapid fashion.
Okay, and then Holly is wondering if there's a connection between the microbiome and skin issues like yeast infections or sheath irritation.
Yes. So definitely between, like I said before, that microbiome is that first interaction with the immune system. And when you start to think about, you know, the immune system is a little bit of the master of so many things going on in the body. And you have to remember the sheath itself has its own microbiome, and the vaginal tract has its own microbiome. And certain areas of the body can have a disrupted microbiome and other areas are healthy. But if you fix the gut microbiome, which is one of the biggest microbiomes and can be an underlying factor for so many things, then you can see improvements in the other areas as well. But so some stuff you might treat topically and some stuff you're going to treat more internally.
Got it. And when you say fix the microbiome, I know probably I'm probably repeating myself at this point, but I just want to make sure I'm fully tracking. Fixing it would be a combination of factors, including forage, feed, supplements, and environment. Is that fair to say, or is that too
Yeah,
broad?
that's nope, that's exactly right. It's all of the things, and the stress level too. I'm going to say that the things that the horse is doing, is their body physiologically able to handle it in a way that, you know, doesn't cause them to spray the walls type of situation. So yeah, there's many factors into it. Um, that's sort of the reason we developed the MQ testing kit, for people that are having trouble figuring out what is it that's going on with my horse's hindgut. I can't get them to have firm manure, and it's just their tail's a mess all the time, and they seem uncomfortable. Let us tell you what's going on. And then what we do is we develop, we have a team of PhD scientists, and every single one of us, we develop those reports, and we develop a custom diet for those horses that send their sample in with the kit. And so we tell you, feed this type of hay, this much hay, this type of feed, this, much feed, this type of supplement, this, much salt for electrolytes, that type of thing. And then we explain it all to you of why we're making the recommendations that we are. So we do try to build a sort of a custom diet for those horses that need it.
It's so incredibly helpful. Like it's amazing the resources you're providing. Okay, so we're getting here almost on the hour. I want to make sure I get Kristen's question in, which is she's asking about if there's been research into microbiome differences across geographic regions, and if so, are there any connections between those differences and issues like ulcers or colic?
Yeah, great question. We don't have enough data points to tell you if different regions are associated with colic or ulcers. We definitely know that horses from different regions have different microbiomes because the environment is just so different. We've done some work with some feral horse samples, wild horse samples, from a very specific region on the Outer Banks, and their microbiomes look very different from quarter horses in St. Louis. There was one horse they sent their sample in, and it looked quite different. And I was like, why is this horse so different? Like, it's healthy, but it's different. And I looked, and the horse was from Alaska. And I was like, oh, I think that's the difference. I think it's because this horse lives in the tundra. And then, so his microbiome is different. He's eating many different things than what we typically see. So yeah, but we don't have enough data to look at those different samples and say, oh, horse is more from this region are more prone to gastric ulceration. You know, certainly the more sensitive the horse is, the more they can be susceptible to any type of gastrointestinal, you know, upset. Um, so it depends on the sensitivity of your horse again, and what you're doing with them.
Absolutely. Um, okay, so there's a lot of this topic that I think, like, there's a lot of factors that lead to a horse having a healthy or an unhealthy microbiome. I want to give listeners kind of a tangible takeaway and things that they can do that are going to help without overcomplicating it or overthinking all the whole every like kind of every element of their horse's life. Um, is there kind of one thing that you wish every horse owner understood about the microbiome? And if yes, what would that be?
Wow, that's a great question. If there was one thing I wanted them to understand about the microbiome, what would that be? You know when it's
It could
right
be
and
two
you know
things
when
too,
it's
if you don't have just one.
okay. Okay. Yeah. I want to say you know when it's right and you know when it's wrong. Is and again, it sort of comes back to the test ride. I want to empower horse owners to make good decisions on behalf of their horses. And you probably know way more about your horse than you think you know. And look at their manure, look at how their body structure looks overall. You know, do they have a hay belly? Do they look, you know, fit and trim and have a super shiny coat and a dappley coat springtime? The horses should be starting to, except for the ones stuck in the blizzard this past weekend, horses should be starting to shed out. You should see a super shiny coat. You should see dapples. You should be thinking, my horse is looking great. That's a sign of a healthy microbiome. Their manure should be firm and shiny balls. And if they're out eating grass, it should be greener. If they're eating hay, it may be more brown. But, you know, if you're washing manure out of their tails all the time and cleaning the walls, you know, there's a problem. You know, always work with your veterinarian, of course, to take a look at things. But it's always, you know, really good management of good quality, consistent hay, and then matching the feed to what that horse is doing. So if they're a super easy keeper, I'm going to put them on a ration balancer. If they need something else, I'm typically going to go higher fat and fiber feed, you know, because you get more calories and less volume. And then I'm going to judiciously supplement for that horse, you know, a few things. Um, I mean, I was at a farm in Wellington, Florida last year or year before, and we were going through and they said, well, what do you think about my horse's supplements? And they took out their smart pack strips. There was more than one, and they had 24 wells of supplements that they were feeding that horse every single day. And nothing against smart pack. I've used smart pack, been a customer of smart pack. Can do, you know, a great job, you know, conveniently, boom, getting those supplements to the barn for your horse. But we went through it and I was like, okay, based on the program we're putting your horse on, 20 out of the 24 supplements were not needed. So, yes, we left the horse on 4 supplements, but he didn't need the other 20 wells, you know? So, um, so yeah, don't just try to fix things by throwing a million things at it. Be judicious, ask for help. There's good nutritionists out there. There's some good information, you know, out there, but again, that comes back to the test ride and, you know your horse. Know your horse.
You might even tell people to trust their gut.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. For
Sorry, I
sure.
had to.
Yeah,
Um,
that's wonderful.
Mary Beth, this is so immensely like useful and valuable information. If people want to work with Purina or work with you or get more information on this topic, kind of is there a website or socials or anyone they can reach out to?
Yeah, mq.purinamills.com is our microbiome sort of landing page. And it takes you to the kit, tells you about the probiotic, gives you the links to the research. If you do the kit, you order the kit online, it's $200 for each kit. And like I said, it's myself or our team of PhDs. We are 6 strong right now, all crazy horse gals with science degrees. I mean, we just do everything every day because we love horses and want to make their lives better. So connect to us through mq.purinamills.com. You can send us an email, you can get a kit, and we're happy to answer your questions because, yeah, it's all about the horse for us.
Amazing. Well, your team of 6 PhD horse ladies seems like a real dream. So I love
We're a
that.
very fun group. It's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I joke. I call them. I'm like, you guys were the best team in the business because we all have different backgrounds of what type of horses we have, whether they're dressage horses or barrel horses or event horses and this and that. And then we're in all different areas of the country, and we all have different PhD specialties, but we are literally all working together to improve the lives of horses, formulate these diets, analyze the data, conduct the research, and it's pretty awesome. Yeah.
That is awesome. And leave it to Purina to pull together an amazing team like this. That is very, very on brand.
Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Mary Beth, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us this evening. I'm sure we could do several more episodes on the microbiome, but we've really scratched the surface this evening, and I feel like I learned a lot, and I just appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, I'm always happy to talk about horses and horse nutrition. It's what I do and who I am.
Amazing. It's to your core. Well, we appreciate you and we appreciate everybody for submitting your questions. And we'll